In the course of debating the economic stimulus legislation, every senator that I have talked to has been interested in trying to find savings to keep down the cost of the economic stimulus bill. I've come to the floor this afternoon because it appears that when the Senate debates the final stimulus legislation, it is not going to include a bipartisan provision to protect taxpayers, a bipartisan provision that would require that Wall Street companies that recently paid excessive bonuses be required to pay those bonuses back to the taxpayer. Taxpayers in this country were horrified several weeks ago to learn about the fact that recently Wall Street companies that had received TARP financing, TARP of course being the Troubled Asset Relief Program, had just paid out $18 billion in bonuses. Once that news became public, everybody in government spoke out against the bonuses. Everybody lined up in front of the television cameras to say the bonuses were wrong. Everybody said that it was outrageous and unacceptable for these Wall Street bonuses to have been paid out when these institutions were receiving billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money. After the news, 3 of us on the Senate Finance Committee, a bipartisan group, said that we were going to do more than say the bonuses were wrong. We were going to take steps to make sure that the bonuses were actually paid back. So we came together and put forward a bipartisan proposal, collaborated with law professors across the country, sought to have the Joint Committee on Taxation under the able leadership of Edward Kleinbard review the financial underpinnings of the proposal, and they found that our modest approach that would allow taxpayers to be paid back the excessive amount of the cash bonus would generate $3.2 billion for American taxpayers, just a fraction of what had been paid out, Madam President. We felt it was a modest proposal. We felt it was a bipartisan proposal. And the fact of the matter is, nobody would oppose our idea in broad daylight. But it now seems that when the ink is dry on the final legislation, the taxpayers of this country are still going to get soaked. It's not right, Madam President. It's not right because taxpayers in this country have been taking a beating with their health care costs and their fuel costs and trying to figure out how to stay in their homes. And you normally believe that companies reward bonuses when they're doing well. That wasn't the case with these Wall Street financial firms. Here's the math, Madam President. The Wall Street firms took $274 billion in taxpayer money. When they weren't doing well, they paid $18 billion in bonuses. But they couldn't pay the taxpayers $3.2 billion of the amount paid out, the excessive amount paid out in cash when the taxpayers are being hit, as we all have seen every time we're home and talking to our constituents. Madam President, the arguments of the financial firms don't add up to me. And they aren't going to add up to the millions of taxpayers whose money has gone to the financial firms, and they deserve to see in this stimulus legislation that somebody was actually standing up for them. That it wasn't just about speeches. It wasn't just about saying something was wrong. It was about backing up those words and taking concrete action to protect taxpayers. So I've come to the floor to, more than anything else, to make it clear that I'm a persistent guy, and I am going to stay at this until there is a better accounting for our taxpayers' money, until there is a stop in place with respect to these kinds of actions where financial firms take taxpayers' money and give the citizens of this country a runaround. This needs to end, Madam President. It needs to end now. And it means that concrete action has to be taken, and that means more than speeches. Madam President, we know in the days ahead, these financial firms are likely to come back to the Congress of the United States and say they need additional sums of money, that they need additional sums to deal with the toxic loans that are on their books. How can one have confidence about giving these firms additional money when they have just paid out bonuses during these tough times and they have fought, I know for a fact, against a reasonable provision to require that these bonuses be paid back? I intend to stay at this, Madam President. It concerns me greatly that we didn't have a recorded vote here on the floor of the United States Senate on this provision. I knew that nobody would oppose this in broad daylight, but I had no idea that there would be such an aggressive effort behind the scenes to kill a modest step to protect taxpayers, and particularly to find savings in this legislation. For days now, senators of both political parties have been talking about ways to hold down the costs. A bipartisan group of senators found a way, a reasonable way, to save more than $3 billion, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. It is time to put a stop to financial firms taking taxpayers' money in this kind of fashion. I'm old enough to know that normally you pay bonuses when you do well. That's what the American economy is all about. That's what capitalism is all about. Somehow some of these institutions think they ought to be able to privatize their gains and socialize their losses. That's not right. And it wasn't right to kill this modest provision to force the repayment of the excessive amount of these Wall Street bonuses. So, Madam President, I intend to come back to the floor of the United States Senate on this subject. I'm going to do everything I can to get a fair shake for the taxpayers of Oregon and the taxpayers of this country. I wish that this bonus recovery provision was in the stimulus legislation that will be voted on here in the United States Senate. I regret greatly that it is not, and I'm going to stay with this until the taxpayers recover this money. It shouldn't have been paid out in the first place.